Today we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle, which is a part of the cardiovascular system. And this is essentially the events of what takes place within the heart throughout the four chambers within a single heartbeat. So as we talk about the cardiac cycle, I want you to think about your own heartbeat and comparing the events of the four phases to what's happening within your own heart, right? Now, before we get into the details of the four phases, let's review the structure of the heart. So let's talk about the chambers again, the valves, and let's just review what's happening here. Okay, so when we draw the heart, we'll draw four chambers. All right, so our four chambers, and then so right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, and left ventricle. Now we know that there are 2 or 4 major vessels that are exiting and leaving the heart. One is bringing the oxygenated blood back from all the systemic vessels, right? And then we also have the pulmonary trunk, which is leaving the right ventricle, and it's going to be going out to the lungs here. Okay, and that's in blue because that's carrying deoxygenated blood. Now we know that there are the pulmonary arteries, or veins rather, that are bringing blood back to the left atrium. And then we have this major vessel that's leaving, sort of curves around like this, called the aorta. Okay. And so let's just label these here. We have the vena cava, which is the largest vein in the body. This is bringing back venous return. And venous return is simply all the blood that's coming back from the systemic vessels back into the heart. Then we have the pulmonary artery. Now this is the only area in the body where an artery is carrying deoxygenated blood. And it's called an artery because it's going towards the lungs. So anatomists name this large vessel here an artery, although it's carrying deoxygenated blood. So just bear that in mind. Then we have the aorta, and the aorta is the largest vessel in the body, the largest elastic artery. We're going to talk specifically about why it's elastic and some of the properties later on. And then your pulmonary veins. There are 4 pulmonary veins. And again, this is sort of a misnomer. Veins are actually carrying deoxygenated blood typically, but in this one instance, veins are carrying oxygenated blood. And again, they named pulmonary veins as a vein because it's bringing blood back from the lungs. Okay, so just bear those 2 name differences in mind. Now we also want to put our valves in, just so we know what valves blood is flowing through. So we got a valve here between the right atrium and right ventricle. We got a valve here between left atrium and left ventricle. We have a valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. And then we have a valve between the left ventricle and the aorta. So this is continuous with the aorta. All right, let's just name those here. So this would be an AV valve. This would be an AV valve. And these would be semilunar valves. Okay. Now, when we talk about the flow of blood here, in a single cardiac cycle, so in a single heartbeat, blood is moving into the right atrium here from the systemic veins, and then it's going to move through the first AV valve. Now, on the right side, the AV valve is the tricuspid valve. and move into the right ventricle. So blood is going to be taking this path here. And then it's going to go up into the pulmonary artery. It's going to go into the lungs, get reoxygenated, come back through the pulmonary veins here. Again, go through the second AV valve, and finally leave the left ventricle and go out into the aorta. So this may get a little confusing here, but all right, so it's going to go out into the aorta. So blood is leaving the left ventricle and going out to the systemic circulation of the body. Now, what we want to understand is that each time this happens, so this is called the cardiac cycle, there are two main phases, so two main events of the cardiac cycle. One is systole, and systole is called ventricular contraction, or ventricular emptying. This is where the ventricles are dumping their blood or dumping the blood from that ventricle out into the vessel, either the aorta or the pulmonary artery. Okay, that's systole. Diastole, which is the longer of both phases, is ventricular relaxation or filling. So this is the point where the chamber is relaxing. Now we speak about the cardiac cycle referencing the ventricles. We're really talking about what's happening in the ventricles more specifically. And so diastole is that longer period of the cardiac cycle where the ventricle is relaxing and it's allowed to fill. So blood is moving from the atria down into this chamber as it opens up, as it relaxes. Okay. The second thing we want to make note of here is what valves are open and what valves are closed during these periods and why. So the AV valves are going to be open when there is a pressure gradient. So we mentioned this last time. Movement of blood from one chamber to the next happens because of a pressure gradient, happens because of a difference in pressure across that chamber. So the AV valves, which are these two valves, will only open when the pressure in the atria is greater than the pressure in the ventricles. Okay, so atrial pressure is greater than ventricular pressure. And so blood will move as the valve passively opens because of that pressure gradient. The semilunar valves, on the other hand, will only open if the ventricular pressure is greater than the pressure in the vessel, so the pressure in the vessels. Meaning that, can you guys see that? Okay, meaning that in order for the semilunar valve to open, the pressure in the right ventricle must be greater than the pressure in this pulmonary artery or the vessel. Okay, and so when the pressure gradient is just right, this valve passively opens and blood can move from one chamber to the next chamber or from one chamber to the vessel that's exiting the heart. All right. And